All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Skill Up series session. My name is Emily Spranger. I'm an academic learning specialist. And of course, we are absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Linda Bloomberg present for us today. Today, she's going to be discussing quantitative research terminology, the roadmap per se, and just a very few brief items that we should suggest before we get started. Today's session is recorded, and I will post the session in the Graduate Studies Support Center on the Skill Up page, and everyone who is registered for today's event will also have access to the recording. The PowerPoint is usually provided to me in PDF format, so I'm happy to pass that along if Dr. Bloomberg shares that over, and we absolutely want you to have conversation in the chat and ask questions in the Q&A. If you do have specific questions about your own research, it is okay to ask these questions in these sessions, but it's really important that you are working with your chair and committee if it's something very specific. So keep that in mind. And then, as always, our subtitles are available. If you'd like to see the closed caption, you can enable that. If you have any questions at all, and if you need anything technically speaking in Zoom land, you can find me in the chat. Feel free to privately message me. And that, I think, about does my items to cover in the beginning, Dr. Bloomberg. So for now, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. It's always so great to work with you and with the Graduate Studies Support Center for providing our students with opportunities to learn. This is actually the second in the two-part series on research terminology roadmaps. I did the qualitative research terminology roadmap about 6 weeks ago. So for those of you who did listen to that, you know what I covered. And for those who didn't, I know that Emily has it stored in the center, and you can always reach out to her for a copy of that webinar, and then you would have the two of them together side by side. So I'm actually going to turn off my camera while I'm presenting, just to have better bandwidth. But I am here. And I just wanted to say that every field is couched in its own set of terminology, not just research. But qualitative and quantitative research contexts have their own set of terminology. And so that was the reason for presenting these two webinars, to really try and wrap one's head around what are the terms that are used, what are the contrasting and sometimes contradictory terminology that we come across. Sometimes things are worded differently in different books by different authors. And so I'm trying to give here with both of these two webinars a clearer understanding of the options and the most acceptable ways of using the terms in the fields of qualitative and quantitative research, and tonight in the context of quantitative specifically. So, Emily, now this is not working.
That's okay.
Okay, there we go.
Oh,
okay, so I just wanted to talk for a moment about the objectives of this webinar. And it really is what I've just said right now, to provide a clearer understanding of the different terms that are used so that we can really understand them and use them more appropriately. And I'm going to be covering terms such as methods, methodology, approach, alignment, ethics, reliability, and validity, and so on. I'm imagining that everybody on today's webinar is doing research of some kind at some point in your program, whether you're right at the very beginning or some way throughout it, or in the dissertation sequence, or even I know some alumni are also on this call just to learn more about qualitative and quantitative terminology, writing articles or publications or doing presentations. And so they're looking to learn more. Now, the quantitative research terminology roadmap, which parallels the qualitative one that I presented previously, includes the following components. And I'm going to be going through each of these in today's session. We're going to start with research ethics, then move to the role of the researcher, research paradigms, research methodology, methods of data collection, research sample and how to do sampling, alignment, research designs, methods of data analysis, and then talk a little bit more about reliability and validity, which parallels trustworthiness in qualitative research. Very, very different terms are used with regard to these words specifically. So I also wanted to mention that I am going to be stopping at various points along the way, as Emily knows I always do, to take any questions, and Emily will be scanning the chat for any questions that come in. So while I'm presenting, please feel free to note down any questions you have, any thoughts that spring to mind. And when I stop, we'll take those and address them. And then I'll also stop at the end for any final questions and concerns. So the first is research ethics, and research ethics apply to both qualitative and quantitative research. In fact, any research that is done with human participants, human beings. And these ethics are really laid out very, very well in the Belmont Report of 1979, which has 3 different principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And all of these 3 principles are strictly enforced by institutional review boards, IRBs. As those of you who have already conducted your research know, that our institution, National University, has its own IRB, and they have the same high standards that any IRB in any institution has to make sure that all research participants are protected, that there is no abuse, that no harm can come to research participants, and that all documentation, data is held as strictly confidential, not divulged, not shared with anybody else other than the researcher. Now, another important term is informed consent. The researcher must make the participants aware of everything about the research study, including the risks, even if the risks are minimal. Remember, every single study carries risks, even minimal risk, because even making a person uncomfortable in terms of what they are thinking about is a risk. It poses a risk to participants. So in your IRB application, you'll be making very clear what risks could potentially emanate from your study. Written consent to voluntarily proceed with a study must be received from every single research participant. And in the case of participants who are underage, have a cognitive impairment, or for any other reason cannot provide legal consent, the term is called assent. And so we get assent from vulnerable populations, being children, prisoners, people with cognitive impairments, etc. These, as I say, are the vulnerable populations. Also including economically and educationally disadvantaged persons or groups, and historically marginalized, underrepresented, or underserved groups. Privacy ensures that the research participants remain anonymous because the information about them is kept confidential. So privacy has these 2 different prongs to it. The one is anonymity, and the second is confidentiality. And anonymity means that the study does not include any identifying information of any of the individual research participants, being their name, their demographics, their address, etc., so that the readers of the study can in no way link any individual responses with the research participants' identities. And we do this by using pseudonyms. We use a pseudonym both for all of the research participants. Everybody is referred to by usually a name of their choice. We try and stay away from numbers because human beings are not just numbers, so we give them names. And we also use pseudonyms for the research site. We don't disclose the name of the school or the institution or wherever else the research is taking place. And this is all just to protect the research participants from identification. And confidentiality is the agreement with the researcher about what can be done with information obtained from each research participant. This is in the consent form, that research participants are assured of anonymity and confidentiality. And usually the research is only shared to, academic communities or audiences that are interested in the study, and none of the identifying information is ever used. So researchers will make sure that their participants understand this prior to giving their informed consent or assent in the case of vulnerable populations. So that is all about the research ethics. And we're now going to move to the researcher role. And remember, whether a person, you or anyone else, is conducting research in a qualitative study or a quantitative study, the role of the researcher really remains the same. However, the big difference between qualitative and quantitative research is that in quantitative, which we're dealing with today, the researcher tries to be as objective and unbiased as possible and uses standardized methods and instruments. Now, if you know, or if you attended the previous webinar, you will know that in qualitative research, this is very different. In qualitative research, it is clearly acknowledged that a researcher as a human being can never really be objective. And the researcher thus discloses their subjectivity and makes it very, very clear. And we also don't use standardized methods and instruments for the most part. We don't use instruments that were developed by anybody else. We typically develop our own. That is really the best way of conducting research and the way the qualitative research operates to its optimal level. Now, positionality is a term that's really also important to understand. And as in qualitative research, this applies to the researcher's role, social location, and identity within the context of the research. It's addressed by acknowledging biases in sampling and the influence on the data collected. So this will apply to both qualitative and quantitative research. Every researcher brings their own positionality. They bring their own identity, who they are in the research process. Often they may be associated with the site. They may be the principal at the school. They may be a teacher at the school. They may be a parent in the institution. And all of this needs to be disclosed, whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative research. But the options to address in quantitative, and this does not apply to qualitative, is that we use an impartial rater and we use additional raters and a team approach. So this does not apply to quantitative. This is where there is a very big difference between qualitative and quantitative research. Now, just before we get to research paradigms, where we're going to be kind of shifting gears a little bit, I'm happy to take any questions that pertain to research ethics or the role of the researcher, if anybody has these or if any questions have come in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. A little pause here. I see no questions in the chat at this moment or the Q&A, but if something does come up in relation to ethics, I will absolutely bring it back up.
Okay. Just remember that we will hopefully address everybody's questions when they arise. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the research paradigms. Now, 1 second. There we go. Okay, so quantitative research diverges completely with qualitative research on this topic of paradigms. Quantitative research assumes that reality is observable, measurable, and stable, completely different to qualitative research. And the research paradigms that are the founding or the grounding frameworks for quantitative research are post-positivism and pragmatism. Now, post-positivism is also known as the scientific method and developed from positivism, which assumes that reality is observable, measurable, and stable, that the research is grounded in the scientific approach of objectivity. As I mentioned before, the research is expected to be objective and unbiased as possible. It's based on precise observation and measurement that is verifiable. This is completely different to qualitative. And science is value-free, and values have no place except when choosing the topic. That is the post-positivistic paradigm. Pragmatism is relevant more so for mixed methods research, which incorporates both qualitative and quantitative. And pragmatism acknowledges that reality is contextually based. It's not just objective and out there in the world on its own. It is based on context. So this is now tying it a little more to a qualitative mindset. And pragmatism employs both qualitative and quantitative methods for data collection and data analysis. So the one that is really, the paradigm that is really most applicable to quantitative research is post-positivism. Now let's move for a moment to the term research methodology. And there's a lot of confusion about this term, and it's used differently in different textbooks. And this is the way I'd like to start explaining it. Research as a start is a systematic process of inquiry that aims to expand our understanding of phenomena, explore relationships, and answer questions that drive knowledge forward. Within the realm of research, there are 3 different methodologies: qualitative methodology, quantitative methodology, and mixed methods methodology. That is where the term methodology best suits and best applies to. And each of these 3 methodologies differs in terms of their distinct frameworks, the tools that are used to gather and analyze data, the philosophies that the researchers employ to investigate and comprehend different aspects of the world. So each methodology is completely different in its structure and function. In a qualitative study, and here I'm just trying to show the difference between the 3 methodologies rather than just explain outright what quantitative is, I'd like you to take a little look at the 3 next to each other. In a qualitative study, you're looking to explore and understand the perceptions and perspectives of your research participants rather than quantify data, as would be the case in quantitative research. In a quantitative study, you're looking to describe a phenomenon, test a hypothesis or theory, augment a theory, that means add to a theory, examine relationships, which includes explaining variance or explaining a process. And in a mixed method study, the researcher intentionally and systematically incorporates both qualitative and quantitative methods concurrently in one study or sequentially in two or more studies. And I have presented previously on mixed methods here as one of the skill ups. It's just important to note, and this is a little bit of a side issue, mixed methods is not just simply a matter of slapping together some qualitative and quantitative methods and calling it mixed methods. Mixed methods is based on the integration of qualitative and quantitative in a very, very precise and professional manner. It also takes a lot more skill because the researcher has to be well versed in both qualitative and quantitative methodologies. And it also takes a lot longer to conduct the study. And as such, mixed methods is not always highly recommended for dissertation research, especially for those students who are not expecting to spend years and years and years on their study. So for purposes of expedience and time, we would recommend choosing a qualitative or a quantitative study. But the choice of methodology, getting back to the word methodology, the choice of methodology shapes every single decision that you make throughout your study, from the way that you base the study, the way that you frame your research problem and purpose, the types of research questions that you use, the way you design your study, gather data, select your sample. Well, in the other way around, select your sample, gather the data, and then analyze that data. So very, very, very different processes based on your choice of methodology. Now let's go a little bit deeper into the methodologies by looking at the actual research designs. And these are the quantitative research designs, very, very different from qualitative, where we spoke about case study, ethnography, phenomenology, narrative inquiry, etc. Here we are looking at non-experimental, experimental, quasi-experimental, and single subject designs. Causation is an important factor, and this does not apply at all to qualitative research. An infer causal effect is used in experimental designs and involves random selection and random assignment to experimental and control groups. And then based on the purpose of the research and the realistic constraints, one also implies causality. So this is really all about how one would set up a research design for a quantitative study by deciding whether it's a non-experimental, either descriptive or correlational, experimental, quasi-experimental, or single subject. Now, again, before I go on to alignment, which is another whole area to discuss, I'd like to just stop and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. It actually did come up in the Q&A of where in the research paper will positionality be identified. And then keep in mind if there's something that Dr. Bloomberg's already mentioned previously and you have other follow-up questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out in the chat or the Q&A.
Sure. So positionality is mentioned depending on the program. There's no hard and fast rule about where it's mentioned in the dissertation. You need to refer to the dissertation template based on your program. A 5-chapter PhD or a 5-chapter EDD has a different template than the 3-section, which is what most of our students are doing these days, 3-section dissertation in practice. And so this is something, just take a look at your template and see where it needs to fit. And if you don't notice it or you don't see it clearly, your dissertation chair will always tell you exactly where it needs to go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. And as someone else, if anyone else has questions in the chat, I will, in terms of like, where do things go? Dr. Bloomberg's 100% correct, following the template based off of your program. So I will pop in the chat the two centers that are for assisting doctoral students with that process. One is the Applied Doctoral Center and the other one's the Dissertation Student Experience. So it is very important, though, that you use the template that is specific to your program. So keep that in mind.
Thanks, Emily. And those two links will be extremely helpful to anyone who just wants to even take a look at other templates and see what the differences are.
Absolutely. And then one more question. Someone had asked a little bit more about qualitative methods. I know you've done several sessions for us about qualitative research. So I would be happy to, if you have any comments on that, Dr. Bloomberg, you can expand a bit on it. I know the focus is on quantitative tonight, but I'm happy to provide some links to other previous qualitative sessions that have been done by you as well too.
I
in
think
our
that'll be
follow-up
the
email.
best, because I think everybody who's come tonight is wanting to learn about quantitative because that's the topic. But yes, qualitative methods, we've discussed these, I've presented on them. These are things like interviews and focus groups and critical incident questionnaires and observations. There are a lot of amazing data collection methods that one can use in qualitative, very, very different to the statistical methods that are used here in quantitative. So I think instead of spending any time on those tonight, please do provide those other
I will.
resources. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's it for right now.
Great. Thanks. So now we're going to move to alignment. And remember, we spoke about alignment for qualitative as well. This applies to both qualitative and quantitative, that all research elements must be interconnected so that the study is a cohesive whole rather than a sum of separate isolated parts. This goes for any study. And I talk about this. I have a full chapter on it in my book, Completing Your Qualitative Dissertation. And it's also addressed in detail in my new book that's coming out in the next couple of months called 101 Nuggets to Prepare for a Qualitative Dissertation, which I hope is going to be helpful to all of our students, both at national and around the world. It's a very different approach to looking at research, so watch out for that publication, also with SAGE. Now, numerous elements must be aligned so the research remains methodologically sound. The research problem and the research design must be fully aligned. You cannot use a research design that does not match with a specific research problem, and you'll learn more about that as you start crafting your own research. The research problem and the research methodology must be aligned. That means your research problem must be suited to quantitative research or qualitative research, depending on what the problem is. And so that also requires some adjusting if it's not fully aligned. The research methodology and the research methods must match. You cannot use quantitative methods in a qualitative study, and you cannot use qualitative methods in a quantitative study. So that's where alignment fits with methodology and methods. Your design, your findings, and the data analysis must all be aligned. And then the data analysis and the data interpretation must be aligned as well. Achieving alignment is something to be aware of right at the very start of a study. It's not an afterthought. So you won't just think about it when you're halfway through. It needs to be part of your plan up front to make sure that your study is well constructed and strong so that it's not going to be flawed in any way. But at the end of the study, you again revisit the importance of alignment to make sure that there are no inconsistencies or gaps or errors. Being very clear about alignment affords a study methodological congruence, and methodological congruence in turn affords a study what we call methodological integrity. Okay, so we're now going to move to, one moment. We're going to move to the research sample and the sampling methods that are used to create that research sample. Again, very, very big differences in qualitative and between qualitative and quantitative research. So in quantitative, the sample size is a very important consideration. We usually use very large random samples, and this is completely different to qualitative research that uses smaller, purposefully selected samples. There must be alignment between the study design and the data analysis and the research questions or goals. This is related to quantitative research. And so a power analysis is required to ensure that the study has sufficient power to detect statistical differences in relationships that exist. The ethics related to the sample size, that if the number is too small, the number of your people in your sample, this will yield inconclusive results and wasted resources, and there'll be an absence of thorough and rigorous evidence. But if the sample is too large, too many participants are exposed to treatments or potential harm, and there could also be wasted resources. So whereas with qualitative research, we purposefully select a small sample based on criteria that we have determined are important for the people in our sample. And here in quantitative research, it's very different. We use statistical significance, and all of these statistical tools such as power of analysis to ensure that we have a study that has the correct sample size. Now we're going to move to methods. And here again, I'm just trying to make clear what we mean by methods as opposed to methodology, because again, these two terms are very much mixed up in the literature, and sometimes people use one or the other to refer to the same thing. But the way that we see it, and the way that I see it, is that the term methods, in contrast to methodology, means specific techniques, procedures, or tools used by the researcher to generate and analyze data. So by generate, I mean gather, collect. So the methods are the ways that we collect data and analyze the data. Specific data collection methods are chosen to collect the required information in the most appropriate and meaningful way. And the rationale and choice of methods is critical because this indicates methodological congruence and indicates the study is grounded in the overall research design. Primary research involves collecting data based on first-hand engagement with your research participants, and secondary research uses data that has already been created. It's archival data. It already exists. And so the methods that are used in qualitative research, as I mentioned earlier, which are interviews, focus groups, open-ended questionnaires, critical incident questionnaires, observation, those are not used in quantitative research. In quantitative research, we use statistical procedures. And so here are the methods of data collection that are used in quantitative research. The data is collected through surveys or tests or closed-ended questionnaires or observation. The difference is that in qualitative research, everything's open-ended because we're wanting to gather the perceptions and the feelings and the attitudes of people. Here, we're not looking at that in quantitative. We're looking at numerical data, numbers, percentages, etc. And that is why we also don't like to refer to percentages in a qualitative study, because it really is a quantitative concept. The emphasis in quantitative research is on objectivity and the non-involvement and unbiased nature of a researcher. Now, nobody can be fully unbiased as a human being, but the goal of quantitative research is to be as unbiased and objective as is possible. It's important to specify exactly how you measured your constructs. In other words, what variables or indicators you used. You describe the response scales and the scoring of the instrument. You provide all the sources for each instrument that you use in quantitative research. You state whether you've modified an original instrument or created your own. You provide psychometric properties, documented construct validity and reliability based on your sample and others used in previous research. The measurement instrument quality depends on the reliability and validity of measurement. Now, reliability and validity do not apply at all to qualitative research. Remember, in qualitative research, we spoke about trustworthiness, which is credibility, confirmability, dependability, and transferability. Here, we don't speak about those constructs of trustworthiness. We speak about reliability and validity. And reliability is the extent to which your sample is free from random measurement error. Reliability over time refers to consistency of the measurement results under the same conditions. Remember, with quantitative research, the general feeling, the goal is to be able to replicate these experiments under the same conditions exactly, given all the information. Qualitative research is never replicable exactly because every single context is unique. Nobody is going to go and study the exact same group of people in the exact same school as you. Whereas with quantitative research, this is usually done under such strictly controlled conditions that studies can be replicated, and the goal is that they can be replicated. Other types of test, retest, parallel forms, inter-rater reliability, internal consistency are all part of reliability. Now, validity is conceived as a characteristic of a test and was later changed to the interpretation and uses of test scores, not the test itself. The current view is that validity is a property of the uses and inferences made based on the test scores rather than the property of a test itself. And we score validity according to the soundness of the inferences based on the scores. Construct validity is that all forms of score validity, such as criterion-related validity, convergent validity, discriminant validity, and content validity, are all subsumed under the broader concept of construct validity. So all of these concepts of measurement, reliability, and validity are constructs that a researcher will need to become familiar with if you are considering doing a solid and rigorous quantitative study. Same as qualitative research. Most researchers who do research for the first time, any of us, including me, have usually not got experience or not had prior experience in research. And so we have to sort of familiarize ourselves by reading up on all of these different terms and tests and applications in order to conduct the study that we're intending to conduct. Okay, I'm going to stop again for a moment, just for a few minutes before we move to methods of data analysis, if anything specific has arisen.
Yes, thank you so much. There was one thing that I just want to just bring out into the space here. Someone had mentioned, like, how do you choose qualitative or quantitative? And one of my recommendations was to go ahead and take a look at ProQuest and see what other kind of dissertations are out there. You can search with either word, qualitative or quantitative, and maybe a subject area that interests you, and just to kind of get an idea of what it looks like. Of course, the Skill Up series can provide you information like Dr. Bloomberg is giving you today on quantitative terminology, or, for example, several other qualitative sessions that she's done in the past. But I think long end of the short of it is kind of getting in there and learning more about how the different methodologies are set up, and maybe what interests you with your topic specifically that might fit within that structure. Is there any other feedback that you have from that, Dr. Bloomberg, that might be helpful?
Yeah, no, that was very helpful. And to that, I'd like to add that really your outlook, your mindset, are you more of a numbers person, or are you more interested in perceptions? Are you more interested in exploring what people think and feel, or are you more interested in doing an experimental study with numbers and percentages and statistics? So right at the outset, you can start asking yourself, like, where you fall on the spectrum. Are you more of a positivist person, or are you more constructivist or critical theory? Critical theory is examining social injustices and marginalization in society. Constructivism is really focused on individual experiences. So where do you fit on the spectrum of the paradigm? So these are already ways you can start sort of testing your own preferences, because remember, you're going to be best doing a study that aligns with your values and your outlook on life. And then the next step is to consider what your research problem fits with. If you're looking to explore experiences or events or situations out there in the world, and you think that it'll be best explored by interviewing people, finding out what they think, looking at their perceptions and analyzing it thematically and qualitatively, then you're probably going to veer more in a qualitative direction. If you're more interested in doing something that just involves numbers and percentages, and you're not really interested in interviewing people or really getting to interact with people intimately, one-to-one through interviews or focus groups, whatever, then you're more interested. So these are all the kind of ways you can start preparing yourself even before you start your study, even at the beginning of your program, before you hit your research courses or even the dissertation sequence. Like, think about what you are, what you bring to the table as a human, what your values are, what you want your study to also contribute out there in the world. Do you want people to understand how other people think and feel? Or do you want people to have a more clear-cut experimental idea of what A, B, C, black and white will be? So think about all these things, in addition to what Emily said, and looking at other dissertations and seeing how people have tackled different research problems, and you'll come to the right decision. And you can also always talk with your chair about it if you're not sure. So all of these things have to be aligned. You have to be aligned in your mind and in your attitude, as well as with your skills and your outlook on what the final value of the research is going to be.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg, for adding that. And then again, if there's anything that is coming up too, I know that was kind of a question that was and an interesting little bit offshoot from today's focus. But if anything comes up with the quantitative terminology as Dr. Bloomberg is moving through this, don't hesitate to let us know. But that's it for right now, Dr. Bloomberg.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Okay, so we're going to move now to data analysis in quantitative studies. And it's pretty involved. And as I said, it really does require you to do some learning. There's a learning curve if you're not familiar with it, because quantitative research, like qualitative, has its own set of procedures, its own set of methods. And quantitative research is associated with a deductive confirmatory approach, very different to qualitative, which is more inductive. bottom up. This is more top down, quantitative is. The goal is to carry out predetermined statistical analyses to answer the research questions and to address the hypotheses. You'd start with an established theory, a general premise or a proposition, and use data to build into it or onto it. You investigate or explore if a theory or a premise holds for a specific sample that you have determined will represent the broader population. There has to be what we call representation in quantitative research. And predetermined criteria are used for testing, example, a level of significance and effect size for practical significance. So there are all these different things that one has to consider when one is embarking on or thinking of embarking on a quantitative study. Quantitative data analysis has a goal of carrying out predetermined statistical analyses to answer, as I say, the research questions or address the hypotheses. The predetermined criteria are used for testing, like a level of significance of power. Statistical null hypothesis testing is most popularly used to test propositions, and other traditions exist for analysis such as Bayesian statistics. Again, pretty sophisticated forms of statistics that will require learning and getting to understand. Interpretation, as opposed to qualitative research, which is very subjective. In qualitative research, the researcher asks themselves, what do I think is going on underneath these findings? What do these findings really mean? Here, in quantitative research, interpretation must be objective. It's all about objectively reporting the results. And remember, another thing I didn't mention is that in qualitative research, we refer to findings. In quantitative research, the preferred term is results. The audit trail of data handling is important in quantitative research, where you clearly report all the practices and everything that all the steps that you took. You would do the same in qualitative research. You report on how you entered or imported the data, how you managed the data, organized the data. You say how you checked for accuracy and cleaned your data. You handled missing data, outliers, extreme cases, and the inclusion and exclusion criteria that you employed. You also state the software that was used, how you analyze your data to describe your sample, using descriptive statistics, tables and charts, etc. You discuss your approach to analyzing data per research question. You do the same with qualitative, actually. And here you use statistics to test the associated hypotheses, and you describe all of the statistics that you use, and you state how you analyzed and interpreted your findings after you've written up the results and analysis chapters. Now, verification is another term used in quantitative research. It does not apply at all to qualitative research. Here we look at things like research reliability, which includes record keeping, detailed information on the research site, the sample collection, the procedures and processes, and audit trails. Now, remember, audit trails are also used in qualitative research. Most rigorous studies will be able to produce an audit trail, which is a clearly outlined step-by-step process of how the study was conducted, not for the purpose of replicating the study, as I said, because no qualitative study can be perfectly replicated given its own unique context. But the audit trail is there to ensure that you held the highest rigorous standards and that you conducted the research ethically, all of those kind of things which would make the research trustworthy and allow your readers or examiners to conclude that the study was ethically and rigorously conducted. Research validity is a term used in quantitative research only, and it's the degree to which the conclusions of all the research can be considered accurate and generalizable. Another term that is not used in qualitative research is generalizability. Instead, we use the term transferability. Internal validity means control over the research design conditions, which determines the accuracy of the results. And the care in participant selection and random assignment to experimental treatments means that you have a biased selection of participants, a non-random assignment to comparison groups, because remember, in quantitative, you really are looking to compare and do an experimental treatment of your randomly selected sample. Poorly controlled conditions over the course of the research will minimize the value of the research and really will bring into question how reliable and valid that research was. External validity parallels generalizability. Population validity means that the generalizability of the research findings is in accordance with the target population, and ecological validity means generalizability of the research findings to other contexts. So again, all of these highly specialized terms apply only to quantitative research. And if you're embarking on a quantitative study, these are the kind of terms that you're going to be learning about in your quantitative courses, so that by the time you reach the research and the research courses, and especially the dissertation sequence, you're going to have a really good understanding of what quantitative research is all about. And that is the end of today's presentation. I know that we have about 15 minutes left. All of this will be sent to Emily, so you'll have a copy of all of this with all of the references. And so I'd like to just open it up to questions now.
I have a couple,
yes.
Dr. Bloomberg. So what we'll do is, if there are questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and or the Q&A. I do have a couple of questions that have popped up, so let me just kind of get to these in order.
I just want to say up front, I'm happy to answer questions that pertain to people's own existing studies or potential studies, but I don't want to get too much into the technicalities of the statistical testing, because each study is very different, and that's where your chair and your committee will guide you into which tests, and also our ASC have incredible coaches that will help with selecting the correct test, whether it's Cronbach's or what experimental design you should use. So all of those will be very, very specific to what you're trying to find out.
Absolutely. And, because our viewers are the people on this call, they're all in all different stages of whatever academic journey they're on. So I know some people are right at the very beginning of this and just trying to kind of wrap their brain around all of this information. And some people have kind of been living and breathing in some of these spaces for a little bit. So just know that they're all questions are welcome. So I know this is something that we touched on in the very beginning of today's session, the difference between methods versus methodology. But I was hoping maybe you could kind of give another explanation. Maybe this person came in late on the call. The main differences between methods and methodology.
Sure. And I may even try and go back to that slide, and I'm very happy to go over.
Because I know it can be confusing, as you had mentioned,
absolutely.
It's been used interchangeably sometimes in literature.
Right. So this is how I understand it and write about it in my books and articles. Methodology is the type of research you're doing. It's a qualitative methodology, it's a quantitative study, or it's a mixed method study. Those are the three methodologies, the big, broad umbrellas of the research. The methods, in contrast, are, where did we have methods? Yeah. The methods, in contrast to methodology, are the actual tools, the procedures, the ways that you collect data and analyze data. So you wouldn't say that you're using experimental methodology. You'd say you're using an experimental method. You wouldn't say for qualitative research that your methodology is interviews. Interviews are the method. So the big general idea of the methodology is the type of research. If you think of it like this, qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods, and then the methods are just the ways, the techniques, the procedures, the tools that you use to gather your data and analyze your data. It's actually quite simple, but I do understand the confusion because some books and some authors refer to it the other way around. They'll say the qualitative method or the quantitative method or the mixed methods, and then they'll say the methodology is your interview. The methodology is your survey. No, it's the other way around. Does that kind of clarify?
That is so helpful. Methodology, big umbrella, methods. What are you doing within that study?
Right. Procedure, technique, tool,
procedures,
way of doing it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And just to have one final thing on that is that the methods, the tools, procedures, ways of doing things, etc., collecting and analyzing data is very, very different in qualitative and quantitative. Very, very different.
Thank you so much for that. The next question I want to, and I love this question. because there's so much blood,
I
sweat,
hope
and
I love
tears
it
that
too.
go. I think you will. There's so much blood, sweat, and tears that goes into the dissertation process. And so, can you do a qualitative dissertation and then take those ideas for a quantitative research study after you graduate?
Absolutely. If you have a research problem that is suited to either qualitative or quantitative, you can absolutely, you can create a similar study with the same topic, and you could make it qualitative or quantitative just based on the way you're going to set it up. So if you set it up as a case study or a phenomenology or a narrative inquiry or whatever you choose as qualitative, you can then use those ideas or that topic to do a quantitative study, but it would just be more numerically based. It wouldn't be focusing on human perceptions. So yes, absolutely. And that would be an incredible thing to do. But really then you could create a mix. It would really end up being a mixed method study, the whole thing together, because it would be the qualitative portion and then the quantitative portion. But I've never really seen it done like that, but I imagine that could be done.
And then, of course, obviously, if you're doing any research with human participants, of course, the ethical thing to do is be getting all of that approved through an institutional
Oh, yeah,
review
you can't
board
do any
anyway.
study,
So,
qualitative or quantitative, or even follow-up study without having IRB approval again for another study, or even once your study is closed, you're not allowed to collect any further data. So once your study is closed, after you've collected and analyzed your data, if you want to do anything further, and I had a student recently who wanted to change something, they had to apply for IRB approval again. So if you're going to be doing a further quantitative or a follow-up, you will need to go through the whole process again, and you'll have to get consent from people again. Whether you use the same people or different people, it's a complete separate study.
okay. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And then I would encourage individuals, and there's other things that you can do. So you could take a portion of your dissertation and you could convert it to what's called a poster. And there's other places where you can go and present your research in different formats, not changing your research or anything along those lines, but it's just kind of developed in a new way and presented in a new way through a different forum. Anyway, so just throwing that out there as well too. I'm always encouraging folks to kind of take that step. You can do it. There's another question here, Dr. Bloomberg, in the chat. Let me see if I'm going to get this right. So where do you explain that research design as a term fits in within methodology and methods in your previous example? I might need you to expand a little bit more on the details of that question because I'm not quite sure.
Well, while someone's expanding, I'll answer to the best of my ability as I understand it.
Okay.
So the methodology is your very big, broad umbrella, qualitative, quantitative mixed methods. That's the top level. And then your methods come below that. But in between those two is the research design. And that is why I explained research design in between methods of data collection and yeah. So your design is very much based on your methodology. So if you're doing a qualitative methodology, you're going to choose a design such as case study. These are all designs: case study, ethnography, narrative inquiry, phenomenology, grounded theory, which is very seldom done with dissertation research because it's highly specialized. But those are all qualitative research designs. So remember, qualitative research, all those designs, and then underneath that, what fits with these? Now remember, the methods that you use to collect data specifically differ between the designs. In a case study, you do short interviews. You can also do focus groups or observations or critical incident questionnaires. In phenomenology, you do different types of interviews. You do very much more extensive interviews, and you interview your participants more than once. That's the way you collect data in a phenomenological design. In narrative inquiry, you're looking at people's stories more than just like a basic story that you do in a case study. In ethnography, you're looking much more at culture. Ethnography is about examining people's cultures, what they think, and it originated in anthropology and psychology. So you can see that the methods that you use must fit with your design. So up at the top is methodology, qualitative, quantitative. Below that is design. Qualitative has case study, ethnography, whatever. Quantitative has these experimental designs that I have here on the screen, quasi-experimental, descriptive, correlational, etc. So those are your two branches of different designs that fit under your two methodologies. Does that, I hope that explains.
That was 100% it. She said she got it. Thank you. So
Okay,
thank
great.
you so much for breaking that down.
Does anyone
I really
else have a
appreciate it.
comment on any of that? Like something that you want clarified? I'm happy to.
It's okay. We do have about a minute or two more. So if anyone has anything that they would like to mention. And then, of course, in the meantime, if you have anything else that kind of bubbles up, I don't see anything coming in right now, but if you do have anything that bubbles up, I would love it if, when I send my follow-up email, feel free to reply to me and just say, hey, this actually did come up, and then I can get with the experts and we can go from there and follow up as
and
well
another
too.
option, Emily, is to start a discussion in the Commons.
Absolutely.
So if you have a question or a concern, put it out there in the Commons, the dissertation support group, any other forums, and I check those forums. I'm a Commons ambassador for the School of Education, or other, team members, students and faculty will chime in, and there you'll start getting some discussion going around the issues. So either directly to Emily and she can field them to me, or she can answer them, or through the Commons.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And then keep in mind, if we do happen to have a few class-based students on the call, the Commons is actually a platform that's coming to the entire NU community. So we're really excited about that launch that should occur in the spring, late
Can I just say
winter.
one other thing that we must also, none of us ever forget, is that your dissertation chair and your committee are also there to answer these questions. So different chairs and different committees also have different ideas about doing research. It's not like set in stone. People have different preferences. And so if you're doing research with a particular chair or committee, that's the person to rely on their judgment, their expertise to guide you, which is not to say that you shouldn't be doing your own reading and your own reaching out and your own discussions, but that person will ultimately, because that person is also going to be your defense examiner and the person that's going to be, finally putting the stamp of approval on your research, that's really your go-to person with regard to methodological questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. And I don't see, there was one other question that came up for quantitative, but for quantitative, can I use an existing study or do I have to create my own? And my assumption is that you would have to create your own study, but just
unless you're doing a replication study, which means you're replicating another piece of research. If not, same as qualitative, you're going to set your study up from the ground, from the research problem, the research purpose. You can establish your research questions or hypotheses in the case of quantitative. Select your design based on your methodology, which is quantitative in this case, and you're going to create a brand new study with your own set of statistical procedures that are the correct and appropriate procedures to use depending on what you're trying to find out. So every single study is set up, and that's what research is all about, and that's the way that dissertation research evolves and finally culminates in a study, so that at the end of it, the student researcher basically knows how to conduct research.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. And I don't have any other questions that have come up in the chat or the Q&A. I do want to say thank you so much to the attendees in the room who had some great questions throughout today's session. We're always learning from you as well too. And Dr. Bloomberg, as always, it is just such a joy to be able to partner with you and for you to bring your knowledge and resources to our Skill Up series. So if anyone had any other final thoughts, Dr. Bloomberg, before we close
I just
out?
want to again thank you, Emily, for always supporting our Skill Ups, to the Graduate Study Support Center, who are all there behind you and supporting you to support us, and to all the students that took the time today, this evening, out of your busy days to attend and learn and think about these important concepts as you move forward with your research. And I wish every single person very much success with their research as you move forward in the process. It's exciting, it's time consuming, but it's certainly worthwhile.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. And until the next time, I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening, and I'll see you
Bye,
all at the next
everybody.
one. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.